A nearly 46-year-old mystery finally solved. A killer identified in the case of murdered teenager Carol Sue Klaber. I'm Angenette Levy, and thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. Carol Sue Klaber's murder has been unsolved for nearly 46 years now. It was early June of 1976 when her body was found ditched on the side of a road in Boone County, Kentucky. That's in northern Kentucky, about 30 minutes or so, maybe 25 minutes across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, Ohio. And joining me to talk about the break in this case is Detective Coy Cox with the Boone County Sheriff's Office. He has been working this case since 2017. Talk to me a little bit about the murder of Carol Sue Klaber first off the bat.
Okay, so Carol Sue was a teenage girl, 16 years old, very social, she liked to ride her bike and would talk with friends in the park, which is kind of hard not for me because I'm older, but for younger people of this day to understand that used to, if you wanted to communicate with your friends, you couldn't just pick up your phone and do the social networking thing. You literally had to go somewhere where you would find other people your age. And so for her, a lot of the times that was in DeVue Park, which is located kind of in Western Covington, Kentucky. So she had taken a bike ride on June the 4th into the park, talked to several friends. They had seen her communicating with other people. And one of the people that they noticed that she had talked to was a gentleman that was described to be approximately 5'10", slender build, blonde hair, shoulder length hair. And he was driving a Pontiac Grand Prix or Chevy Monte Carlo type vehicle, two-door car, which was really popular back in those days. So as she was leaving the park, they noticed that they put the bicycle into the trunk of the man's car, and then witnesses at her house saw Carol taking the bicycle out of the trunk of the car into her house. She came back out and left in that vehicle. When she left in that vehicle, that was described, and with the same gentleman with the description that I gave, the slender build, the blonde hair, the 5'10", that was the last time that Carol Sue Klaber was seen alive by any witness account that we have. So then on the following morning, about 8:30 in the morning, Dr. Gaines Huey, the dentist in Walton, was on his way to work. He's driving along Chambers Road, which is located in southern Boone County. And he observed a body, and it turned out to be a dead body in the right at the edge of the road, right where a culvert is, a drain pipe for any kind of storm water. So when he found the body, then he immediately called police. He was familiar with state police and had their number, so he called the Kentucky State Police Post, and Trooper Jan Wushner, who also has worked for the Boone County Sheriff's Department and retired from here a few years ago, was the first police officer on the scene. So from that point, then the investigation started, and Detective Jerry Keith was assigned to investigate the case. So that kind of tells you of how it started.
Coy Cox says that Detective Keith carried this case with him for decades, always wanting it solved. When Cox and his partner Tim Adams took it over, they investigated two suspects. The first was in northern Indiana. He had stolen a Pontiac Grand Prix.
He cooperated fully and was pretty candid about saying, I've done a lot of things. Not going to deny that. But
I didn't do this.
But I did not kill Carol Sue Klaber. And so at that point in time, I mean, a lot of it lined up, and it was kind of like, well, it kind of looks like that you did, but we'll see. So he looked at us and he said, well, when you find out I didn't kill her, you're going to call me back and tell me, right? And we said, yes, we would. So rather than having a cliffhanger here, we have called him back and said, look, you were not the one who killed Carol Sue Klaber. And he said, I'm shocked. He goes, even when I said it, I didn't think you guys would call me back. So we did call him back and let him know.
In 2020, Cox and Adams investigated a second suspect. He committed a brutal rape in 1978 in the same area and admitted to it. His name was Michael Dean Tate. Both suspect 1 and Tate were ruled out because their DNA was compared to DNA left on the body of Carol Sue Klaber by her rapist and killer. Last September, Cox and Adams sent the evidence from Klaber's murder to Othram Labs. That's a laboratory that uses genetic genealogy to help law enforcement identify suspects. An organization called Season of Justice funded the testing. Cox says that is when a suspect was finally revealed.
In less than 2 months from that time, we got response back from Othram Labs that, hey, we believe this is your guy, but the way that it works is they say you need to go and collect DNA from family members because he was deceased, the suspect that they had identified. So we need to exclude. In other words, they would collect, we think this is him, collect from this family member. And then obviously if it comes back that that DNA doesn't match, then that excludes him. However, that's not what happened. When we collected that, they said this is a 100% match.
Wow.
A parent-child match.
Cox said the name that Othram Labs gave to him and Adams was Thomas Dunaway.
Much to our surprise, we found out that he had committed a murder here in Boone County, Kentucky in December of 1976. He shot and killed Ronnie Townsend. He shot Ronnie Townsend on December 17th. Ronnie Townsend died on the 21st. So he lived for 4 days before he died. But that Thomas Dunaway was later confessed to that crime and was convicted and was sentenced to life in prison. However, as it turns out, he got out in December of 1984. He only did 7.5 years in prison. So that was kind of shocking to us. But for our case, it's like, okay, so we know he was here 6 months after Carol Klaber's murder because he was here murdering someone else.
Cox looked at that old murder case file and developed some information about Thomas Dunaway.
He had found out that Thomas Dunaway was had enlisted in the military. And then it got really interesting when we started taking a look at that because we found that Thomas Dunaway enlisted in the military on June the 14th, 1976.
Cox says that Dunaway actually went AWOL from the Army 6 months after murdering Carol Sue Klaber. That's when he returned to Kentucky and committed the Townsend murder. And he said it was part of a crime spree that actually included burning a car. Sadly, Dunaway won't be prosecuted because he passed away in 1990. But this week, Cox and Adams obtained an order to exhume Dunaway's body so they could get a DNA sample. Under the law, they have to get it directly from his body so it can be entered into CODIS to see whether or not he's a suspect in any other crimes. Coy, what was Carol Sue's brother's reaction or what did he say when you told him you believed you had solved her murder?
So we actually told him emphatically that the murder had been solved. The evidence that we have is a no-brainer that he was the person who raped and killed Carol Sue Klaber. So when we sat down with him one day last week, we spent the afternoon with him. And when we sat down with him and told him absolutely that the case is solved, this is what happened, and we walked through it. Physically, you could see him, just the relief. I mean, he just let the air just kind of left his body, and and then he made the audible statement that I have closure. I have harbored so many thoughts and so many feelings. And he said, and I'm just going to be honest with you, there's someone, and he described this person that was in his life when he was younger in high school. And he goes, in the back of my mind, I always thought it was him. That was the most important thing that we did in this case. And what he did was the single hardest thing in this case to do, because when Carol's body was found, someone has to make positive identification, and that was him. Mm-hmm. He had to identify his sister. And I can't imagine doing that. And so for him to get some kind of closure, in his own words, was was worth everything. Yeah.
And that was Detective Coy Cox from the Boone County Sheriff's Office in Kentucky. The case of Carol Sue Klaber, her unsolved murder, now closed after nearly 46 years. Detective Cox says a lot of the credit goes to Jerry Keith for all of his investigative work in the case over the years. Detective Keith has since passed away. For Law and Crime, I'm Angenette Levy.